Imagine waking up in the middle of the night and feeling that something is wrong, an invisible presence, a silent unease whose origin we don't know. Many people have experienced this, but few know about Edgar Cayce's ancient technique, the so-called sleeping prophet, who recommended a simple glass of salt next to the bed as a form of protection. The idea might seem strange at first glance, but there's something profoundly human and ancestral in this practice, the search for security when we surrender our body and soul to sleep, that moment when we are most vulnerable. Cayce believed that salt had the ability to purify not only the physical environment, but also the energies around us, acting as a silent barrier against everything that doesn't belong to our well-being. When we think about this, it's impossible not to remember ancient traditions that always attributed sacred power to salt. In the Bible, it appears as a symbol of covenant and incorruptibility. Eastern peoples used salt as currency, so precious that it even gave rise to the word salary. Our grandparents, often without understanding the origin of this belief, would place pinches of salt in corners of the house or behind the door to ward off the evil eye. The curious thing is to realize that, even in cultures that never had contact with each other, the idea of salt as protection arose spontaneously. This makes us wonder, is there something universal, almost instinctive in the human relationship with salt? Edgar Cayce, famous for his spiritual readings and visions performed in a trance state, believed that during sleep, our soul partially detaches from the body and travels through dimensions that are not always safe. For him, the glass of salt water acted as a kind of anchor, a protective link between the physical body and the spiritual world. More than a superstitious practice, Cayce saw it as a way to balance the invisible and the concrete, helping people have more peaceful nights free from negative influences. It's interesting to note that in his view, it wasn't just about protecting against something external, but also about calming the internal turbulences we carry to our pillow. Perhaps that's why this technique continues to spark so much curiosity. After all, who hasn't experienced restless nights, full of strange dreams or nightmares that felt too real? Who hasn't woken up with the feeling of having fought against something invisible? These moments remind us that sleep is not just rest, but also a deep dive into layers of the mind and for some into spiritual territories. Cayce, with his peculiar vision, offered a simple, almost naive but comforting resource: a glass of water, a spoon of salt, and the faith that this could protect us. If we look back, we'll see that our own family histories carry similar memories. Perhaps you remember your mother or grandmother placing a glass of water behind the door when someone had a fever or recurring nightmares. Often these gestures seem trivial, but there was an intuitive wisdom in them. Science may question it, but the heart knows that small rituals have power, not just for what they represent, but for the confidence they inspire. Salt by the bed is, in that sense, much more than a chemical substance. It's a symbol of care, a silent way of telling oneself that one is protected. It's curious to notice how these practices gain strength precisely when we need them most. When life brings us uneasiness, when days seem heavy, we seek refuge for the soul in simplicity. The glass with salt then transforms into a reminder that we are not alone, that something greater is accompanying us. And even if it's just a symbolic gesture, it carries immense power. Because deep down, what calms us is not just the object itself, but the intention we put into it. It's the faith, hope, and connection with traditions that have traversed centuries and reached us. Edgar Cayce used to say that the soul needs rest as much as the body, and that sleep is one of the most delicate moments of human existence. He believed that negative energies could influence us while we slept, weakening us the next day. Hence the importance of creating a protected environment, not only physical but also spiritual. When we think about this, we realize how little attention we pay to sleep, as if it were just a pause between days. But in fact, it is in this interval that the body regenerates, that the mind organizes memories, and that the soul finds paths of renewal. If a glass of salt can help transform this moment into something more serene, why not try it? Perhaps this is what makes this practice so fascinating, the blend of the mystical and the mundane. We are not talking about complex rituals, but something that anyone can do in their own home. It requires no money, no great effort, just the willingness to believe. And even if some see it merely as superstition, we cannot deny that there is a real comfort in feeling protected. After all, the human mind responds strongly to symbols. When we place the glass by the bed, we are also telling ourselves, "This is a safe space. Here I can rest in peace." This technique also opens space for deeper reflection. How many times do we neglect small rituals that could improve our lives? How many times do we underestimate the power of simplicity, believing that only the grandiose has power? Cayce reminds us that often the extraordinary reveals itself in the ordinary, in things within our reach. Maybe salt is just salt, maybe it's more than that. What really matters is what we feel when adopting this practice. The sensation of taking care of oneself, of valuing one's own rest, and of believing that the invisible also deserves attention. As night falls and silence spreads, this glass of salt becomes almost an invisible guardian. It makes no sound, doesn't shine, doesn't impose itself. It's just there, discreet, fulfilling its symbolic function. And perhaps it is precisely this simplicity that makes it so special. In a world where we seek answers in advanced technologies and immediate solutions, such a simple gesture rescues something we are losing: the connection with traditions that have spanned generations, the humility to recognize that there are still mysteries beyond what we can explain. Some say that salt, when resting silently in a glass of water, acts as an invisible guardian, absorbing what we cannot see but feel on our skin. Edgar Cayce believed that this practice created a protective barrier against forces that could disturb the soul's rest. But to understand the depth of this gesture, one must delve not only into the life of the sleeping prophet, but also into stories that span centuries and reveal how humanity has always sought ways to protect itself during sleep. Imagine ancient navigators crossing unknown oceans in fragile vessels. They carried salt on their ships, not only to preserve food, but also as an amulet against storms and sea spirits. In remote villages, mothers would place small handfuls of salt under their children's pillows to ward off nightmares. In indigenous rituals, salt was thrown in circles around the bonfire, as if it were an invisible line demarcating a sacred space. When we think about this, we realize that Cayce didn't invent something new, but rather resurrected ancient and universal knowledge, translating it for a modern era where spirituality began to blend with science. And the fascinating thing is that the human body itself is made of salt. Our tears, our sweat, and even our blood carry this element that has been with us since our first day of life. Isn't it curious to think that what protects us also lives within us? Perhaps that's why we feel such a strong connection with this gesture of placing a glass of salt by the bed. It's as if it's a silent reminder that we are part of something greater, that there is a continuity between what is inside and what is outside of us. Cayce said that when sleeping, the body opens itself to invisible realities, and salt, present both in the glass and in our own being, creates a link of balance and harmony. Reports from people who followed this advice have spanned generations. Some recount that after nights of insomnia, they finally managed to sleep peacefully after adopting the ritual. Others say intense nightmares disappeared as if by magic. Even more intriguing are those who claim to have felt the environment lighter, as if the air had been purified. Of course, modern science may raise eyebrows at such stories, but there's something that cannot always be measured in laboratories: the impact of what we believe on our reality. How many times have a simple prayer, a gesture of faith, or a cherished memory been enough to transform our disposition? Perhaps the glass of salt belongs to that same category of symbols that carry a much greater force than they seem. And here's an intimate reflection. When was the last time you allowed yourself to believe in something simple? In a time when everything needs explanations, numbers, and proofs, we forget that the soul doesn't feed solely on logic. It also needs symbols, rituals, small anchors that give us security. Salt, in this case, acts as an ancestral whisper, a bridge between the visible and the invisible. It doesn't matter if you see it as spiritual protection, as an energy purifier, or merely as a habit inherited from elders. What truly matters is the transformation it can bring about within you. Edgar Cayce understood this better than anyone. His visions went beyond time and space, yet paradoxically, his recommendations were always simple. He didn't ask people to seek distant temples or perform complicated ceremonies. On the contrary, his wisdom lay in rescuing the power of everyday gestures, those that anyone could adopt. The glass with salt is exactly that, an accessible act, but one that carries within it the reminder that spirituality is within everyone's reach, not just scholars or initiates. And we mustn't forget an important detail. Salt not only protects, it also transforms. In nature, salt preserves, adds flavor, prevents time from destroying. On the spiritual plane, it does the same. It preserves our energy, gives flavor to inner life, and prevents us from being corroded by negative influences. When Cayce spoke about sleep, he emphasized that this was the moment when we most needed this preservation, because we were surrendered to a state of profound vulnerability. And isn't that exactly what we feel when we lie down? However comfortable the bed may be, there is always a surrender, an act of trust that we will wake up safely the next day. I remember a touching story of an elderly lady who late in life said she had placed a glass of salt by her bed her entire life. When asked if she truly believed it protected her, she smiled and replied, "Maybe the salt doesn't do anything. But it reminds me that someone at some time believed in it, and when I remember that, I sleep better." This answer reveals something profound. We don't need absolute certainty to find peace, only symbols that connect us to something greater than ourselves. And perhaps that is what we most lack today, connection. Amidst so many distractions, we lose the sensitivity for small rituals that could restore our serenity. The salt in the glass is not just an isolated gesture, it's an opportunity to pause, breathe, and recognize that there are mysteries in the world that don't need to be solved, just lived. And deep down, it is this humility before the invisible that restores our balance. As the glass rests on the nightstand, the salt silently begins to interact with the water. We don't see it, but we feel it. It dissolves, spreading invisibly, just like the intentions we place when performing this gesture. Cayce believed that the simple act of preparing this glass was already a form of prayer, an invitation for the body and soul to come into harmony. And perhaps this detail makes all the difference. It's not the object itself, but the intention we deposit into it. Thus, night after night, this ritual transforms into a routine of care, a reminder that we deserve true rest. And when sleep comes, it seems that something within us also surrenders, knowing that there is a silent force watching over the environment. It is not magic, it is not superstition, it is the human need to feel supported. There are moments when small practices transform into bridges between generations, almost like invisible inheritances we carry without realizing it. The glass with salt, so simple and silent, is one of those gestures that travel through time, crossing centuries to reach us. Edgar Cayce, with all his fame as the sleeping prophet, knew that such symbols don't survive by chance. They endure because they touch something deep within us, the need for protection, for comfort, for believing that an invisible shield exists between our vulnerable body and the mysterious world that envelops us during sleep. Think about the room where you sleep. At night, when the lights go out, the environment takes on another dimension. Silence becomes denser, shadows seem to lengthen, and even small noises gain importance. It's at this moment that our mind begins to create images, memories, and even fears that don't appear during the day. Cayce said that sleep was not just rest, but also a portal to other dimensions, to territories that escape reason, and it is precisely for this reason that we need symbols of protection, not because they are magical in themselves, but because they prepare us to cross this frontier more serenely. Salt, dissolved in water, represents this balance between the tangible and the invisible. It is not just a kitchen ingredient, but an ancient companion. Ancient peoples believed that salt had the power to ward off evil spirits because its purity could not be easily corrupted. In Rome, priests used salt in purification rituals. In Japan, even today, small mounds of salt are placed at the entrance of restaurants and homes to ward off bad energies. In the Middle East, it was common to seal pacts of friendship with a handful of salt, symbolizing fidelity and mutual protection. And isn't it curious to realize how, in different parts of the world, the message is always the same? Salt is seen as a guardian, as a preserver of what is essential. Now imagine this gesture applied to your own rest. Placing the glass next to the bed is not just a mystical practice, it is also a ritual of self-care. It's as if you were telling your body, here you are safe, you can rest. Often what prevents us from sleeping well is not the pillow or the mattress, but a restless mind. We carry worries, fears, and memories to bed that seem not to abandon us. And the ritual of the glass with salt acts as a marker, a symbolic boundary between day and night. It helps us to say, everything that is heavy stays outside. Here inside there is only room for peace. Some have witnessed profound changes by adopting this simple habit. One woman recounted that, after losing her husband, she spent sleepless nights, consumed by insomnia and sadness. One day, she remembered her mother's advice. Place a glass with salt next to your bed. It will calm your soul. She followed the advice without expecting great results, but that night she slept soundly for the first time in months. When she woke up, she didn't say the salt had performed a miracle, but rather that the gesture had rekindled in her the memory of maternal care, as if she were no longer alone. And that's exactly what makes the difference. It's not the substance itself, but what it awakens in our heart. Cayce always insisted that faith is the true catalyst for transformations. The glass with salt is merely a vehicle, an anchor that helps us direct energy to what truly matters, the balance of the soul. In other words, it does not replace faith, but sustains it. Curiously, even modern science is starting to see the value of rituals. Research on sleep psychology shows that small habits before bed, such as lighting a candle, saying a prayer, or simply preparing the environment, have a direct effect on the quality of rest. This is because the brain associates these gestures with the idea of relaxation and security. In this sense, the glass with salt fits perfectly as part of a nightly routine that signals to the body, now it's time to rest, you are protected. Another fascinating layer of this practice is the idea of purification. Many believe that salt in water absorbs not only bad energies, but also the emotional remnants we carry. Throughout the day, we interact with people, face challenging situations, and accumulate tensions. At night, all of this can manifest in restless dreams or a feeling of heaviness in the environment. Salt, silently, would represent the cleansing of this invisible field, like a spiritual sponge. Therefore, some traditions recommend discarding the salt water in the morning, away from the sleeping area, as a way of releasing what should not remain. It's beautiful to realize how such a small gesture can carry so much symbolism, and it's even more beautiful to think that, by adopting this practice, we connect to a stream of people who, throughout history, found the same solace in the same ritual. When we place the glass with salt next to the bed, we are not alone. We are accompanied by thousands of anonymous hands that have repeated this gesture in different times and places. We are in a way united with all those who also believed that sleep deserves protection. And at this point, a question arises. Isn't it precisely this connection that protects us? Perhaps the power of the ritual lies not only in the salt, but in the invisible network of belief that sustains it. When we participate in an ancestral custom, we immerse ourselves in a collective force that transcends the individual. And that in itself is profoundly transformative. Therefore, the glass next to the bed should not be seen as an isolated amulet, but as part of something greater, a tradition that reminds us of the fragility and, at the same time, the strength that exists in faith. It is a practice that unites past and present, the individual and the collective, the visible and the invisible. And in the end, isn't that what we all seek? To sleep with the certainty that we are supported, that a greater care envelops us, even when we close our eyes and surrender to the unknown. Cayce understood this need with a rare sensitivity, and perhaps that is why his technique withstands the test of time, because it is not just about salt or water. It is about care, about trust, about the universal desire to wake up refreshed and in peace. There is a silent scene that plays out every night in thousands of homes around the world. A person places a glass of salt water next to their bed, turns off the light, and lies down. Nothing grand, no elaborate ritual, just a simple gesture. And yet, in that gesture there is something profoundly human, the trust that invisible forces watch over us as we sleep. Edgar Cayce left this practice not as a magic formula, but as a reminder that the soul needs protection just as much as the body needs rest. It's curious to think that, despite all technological advancements, we continue to return to such ancient traditions. We live in a time when almost everything can be explained by science, but sleep remains shrouded in mystery. Researchers still don't fully understand dreams, nor why some of them seem so real as to affect us for days. What Cayce brought was precisely an answer to this grey area between reason and the inexplicable. The idea that we need to prepare ourselves spiritually for sleep, in the same way we prepare the bed and pillow, and perhaps that's what's most fascinating about this practice. Because deep down it doesn't require you to abandon your logic or change your beliefs. It merely invites you to experiment. The glass with salt asks for nothing in return, charges nothing, imposes nothing. It is there as a symbol, discreet, almost invisible but loaded with meaning. And each time we repeat the gesture, we create a habit that connects us with something greater, like a silent prayer. The stories of those who adopted this technique are many and always moving. One man recounted that for years, he suffered from recurring dreams where he found himself lost in dark places. After he started placing the glass with salt next to his bed, not only did the dreams decrease, but he also felt a new lightness in his mornings. Another person reported that, after a difficult phase, she would wake up every night with anxiety and chest tightness. The practice of the glass with salt did not make her problems disappear, but it gave her the feeling that she wasn't facing the night alone, and that in itself was enough to calm her heart. And perhaps therein lies the true secret. Salt is not just an element of nature, it is also a metaphor. It reminds us that life needs balance, that excess can be harmful, but the right amount preserves, protects, strengthens. When we put salt in water, we are also reminding ourselves of the importance of purifying, of letting go of what no longer serves us. In a way, the glass with salt is a small declaration of intentions. Today I choose peace. Today I choose to release what weighs me down. If we pay attention, we will see that all the great spiritual traditions of the world carry this same teaching, the importance of surrender, of trusting, of creating a space of inner silence. The practice recommended by Cayce is just a simple and accessible version of this universal principle. It doesn't matter if you believe in spiritual energies or if you see the gesture merely as a way to prepare the mind. The result is the same: lighter sleep, a calmer heart, a more serene soul. But there is still a deeper layer to this practice, and perhaps it was the one that most touched Cayce. He said that, when we sleep, our soul travels and learns. Dreams are not just meaningless stories, but messages, reflections, lessons, and if the soul truly traverses invisible paths during the night, it makes sense to want to protect it. The glass with salt would then be like a lamp lit in the darkness, a small spark of protection that accompanies this silent journey. Perhaps you've never thought about it, but sleep is an act of courage. It is surrendering to the unknown, closing your eyes without knowing exactly what will happen. It is trusting that you will wake up refreshed. And that is why symbols like the glass with salt are so powerful. Because they give us the courage to make this surrender, they remind us that there is an invisible network of care sustaining each one of us. In the end, what truly matters is not whether salt wards off bad energies or acts as a physical purifier. What matters is the inner transformation it provokes. Each night we repeat the ritual. We are reminding ourselves that rest is sacred, that we deserve to sleep in peace, that we are not unprotected. This changes how we face the next day. A person who sleeps well, who wakes up in peace, has more strength to face life's challenges. The simple gesture then transforms into a source of daily renewal. And if we think about it, perhaps that's what Cayce wanted to leave us. The certainty that the extraordinary is not in complex rituals, but in small acts of faith. The glass with salt is a gift of simplicity, an invitation to slow down, to trust, to remember that even amidst mystery, there is always a way to feel protected. Perhaps after finishing this video, you will feel inspired to try it. Maybe you'll decide today to prepare your glass with salt and place it by your bed. And in doing so, don't expect grand miracles. Expect something more subtle, more profound. The peace of knowing you are taking care of yourself, that you are honoring your rest, that you are connecting to a tradition that spans generations. And when the next morning you discard that water, remember that you are also letting go of what you no longer need to carry. Each night will thus become not just a moment of sleep, but a ritual of renewal. And little by little, you will realize that this silent gesture has the power to transform not only your nights, but also your days. Because in the end, the secret of the glass with salt is not just to protect the soul while we sleep. It is to teach us that true protection comes from within, from the care we offer ourselves, from the faith we choose to cultivate, from the hope we do not let die. Edgar Cayce merely reminded us of something we already knew somewhere in our heart, that we are stronger, more protected, and more connected than we imagine. And now I leave an invitation. If this story touched you, share your experience. Tell us in the comments if you already knew about this practice, or if you will try it today. Your words can inspire others to rediscover the peace they may have been seeking for a long time. And if you feel that this content made sense, subscribe to the channel. Here, all stories have a purpose, to rescue traditions that warm the soul and remind us of what truly matters, because in the end, it's not about a glass, nor about salt. It's about you. About the rest you deserve. About the protection that is already around you, just waiting for you to recognize it.